please. Does anybody here go to college? You went to college? Some of you don't want to admit it. Maybe I went to college, me too. But I went to college when I was younger, and I enjoyed it. I went to University of Massachusetts at Amherst, which is like a huge. Maybe our sound wasn't on. Was that the problem? Okay. So it was a huge, gigantic school. It had like 30,000 kids in that place. And I lived on campus for the first 2 years. And so I also, when I was on campus living there, I got the meal plan. You guys have heard of that, right? So they have like their own cafeterias and what they call the dining commons where you could eat there and not have to leave campus. And so I got the meal plan. And there were, at this school, because it was so large, there were 5 residential areas that you could live in, each of them having dining commons in those areas. The one I had 2, so it was like 6 to 7 dining areas that you could go to anytime you were on campus. Wherever you stopped, you could just go and eat as long as you were part of the plan. Now, I had a roommate that his name was Dan, and Dan loved the food at the dining commons. Now, I thought it was like a tiny grade above high school of food. You know, if you've been to the high school cafeteria, who here would go eat at the high school cafeteria? What if they paid you? You know, it's like, I'm so glad, right? We're not in high school anymore because our poor kids, I feel bad for them. And they don't really know what they're missing at this stage. But when you get to college, you probably ate out a few different places. You've probably had different food. You've grown in your taste. My daughter Charlotte, she loves chocolate, but she's like a chocolate connoisseur now. I made a big mistake on Valentine's Day because she likes chocolate so much, and she likes dark chocolate, and it has to be like a name brand like Ghirardelli or something. It's not that she's a snob per se. It's just that she knows the difference now. And I got her one of those little Russell Stover's hearts, and I had accidentally swapped the cards with my wife's giant bouquet, which was bigger, and I had put some Peeps, because Easter Peeps are coming out, you know those, the marshmallows for her, just for fun. And she goes to my wife, because I wasn't there. If you recall, it was actually last Sunday. I was already gone to church. And she goes, "Oh, Poppy knows I don't like those cheap chocolates. That's why he got me the Peeps." And when I came home, I'm like, "Actually, the small box is for you." I still have to make it up to her. All right, so I'm getting off track a little. But you know what it is? Your taste beginning to grow. So we get to college, and most of the people didn't really enjoy the college food, but you do whatever you have to do to get by. And I grew up in an Italian home. My grandmother was off the boat, literally, when she was young. Her family, when they came, her parents started a restaurant because they were that good at cooking, an Italian restaurant that became very well known up in Massachusetts. And so imagine when I come home, she's cooking homemade meals, and I'm used to this amazing food. So the dining commons to me was like, I was like, it's not so great. And my friend, he was Italian. I knew some other people. They all felt the same way. So when my friend Dan would say, "This food is so great," we would all look at each other perplexed. Like, what are you talking about? He's like, "Yeah, this is the best food I've ever had." I'm like, "Are you crazy? We're all confused. We're all wondering." And then finally one day he says to us, I'm like, "Why is it that you love this food so much?" And he goes, "Well, because my mother, she's a terrible cook." And I'm like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, let me give you an example of one day when I came home and she was cooking. She didn't know how to cook anything. She couldn't even cook a can of beans if she opened it, right?" So he goes, one day she decided she was going to make a veal parmesan. All right, have you ever had that? It's an Italian meal. So I'm like, okay, I have an expectation of what that's going to look like. And he goes, but she starts to cook, and as she's cooking, it's not like she went shopping and got the ingredients. She was just going to use whatever she had in her home. And because she didn't have any veal, she had ground hamburger meat. And so she made the ground hamburger meat into these little patties and actually breaded them and then fried them. And she put that on the plate, and he says, but because she didn't have any mozzarella cheese, she just used the Kraft single Velveeta on top of it, whatever it was. And not only that, we have some Italians down here that are dying right now. Not only that, she did not have any sauce, tomato sauce. She used ketchup. So you can imagine eating this disgusting Parmesan soaked, I don't know what you would call it, beef patty covered in cheese and, Velveeta cheese and ketchup. I mean, it is the grossest thing. And we all were like, I totally get it now. I totally understand why you like the dining commons, right? All of us are like, that's just not right. As we're listening to this, you're like trying to stop, put on the brakes. Please don't say she's used that. No, please don't say that, right? Because we're like, we have an expectation of what
veal parmesan or even chicken parmesan should look like, and we're like thinking good things, and we're like, this is a train wreck. It's going in the whole wrong direction. Have you ever found yourself in a place where you're like, this can't be right, right? This can't be right. I was having a hard time believing my friend Dan when he told us this story, because I have this picture of what veal parmesan looks like, and it definitely doesn't look like that. I have an expectation of what it should be. And so I imagine what it feels like to be someone else or who is in the same position going, never having it before. They would think, if this is what veal parmesan is, I never want to eat it again, right? But we kind of experience this all the time when we go to restaurants too. I mean, I don't know if you've ever ordered something, you read that description, and you're just like, wow, I really want to eat that. That looks so good. And then you get it, and you're like, oh my gosh, like this was not really what I expected. Advertising does that all the time, like McDonald's, when they advertise their Big Mac. Look at this. I'll show you. This is what McDonald's, go ahead, put up. The advertisement there is over on your left, but this is when you open it up. This is what it really looks like, right? You expected this because you saw the picture behind them, and when you got it and opened it up, it looked kind of like that. Burger King is no better. Look at, there's their Whopper giant. That quarter-pound beef patty looks awesome, and this is really what we end up getting. And then if you're a taco fan, Taco Bell, they give you this nice and over here, the cheese, everything stacked nice and high, and then this is this mushy, squished thing that you actually really get, right? And so our expectation is this, but this is what we end up getting. It happens all the time. It happens in our lives. You ever get a new job, and you're so excited to start that new job, and you're thinking, man, the possibilities, the money I'm going to make, it's going to be so much fun, the boss is going to leave me alone, and then you start the job, and you're like, this isn't what I expected at all. What happened here? Or the new home that you move into. When we move from one home to the other, we're trying to leave all of our other home problems behind, right? All the maintenance and all the other stuff. You move into the new and you think it's going to be great, and then you find out a ton of things didn't work, and there was other issues with that house, and that's kind of the way it is. Expectations can kind of let us down. I find this to be the most fascinating thing, but vacations will rarely ever turn out the way you had planned. Does that ever happen to you? I mean, throw the kids in the mix, and it's definitely not going to turn out the way you want. That's the way it is. You can plan it to the best of your ability. You have all these expectations of having this great vacation, and you ever get someplace, and you were going to go visit this, you're going to go visit that. I'm one of those people that has this, I'm going to go visit the museum, then I'm going to go visit downtown, then we're going to go get to this place, the restaurants are supposed to be so awesome, and you get to all that, and you end up doing only one of those things because you just can't get it together, right? And you're like, it just lets you down. It's a disappointment. And see, when we have expectations, they can set us up for these disappointments. And if you have your outlines out, can you pull them out? Because I have a fill-in right away, right off the top of the bat. It's going to help you stay connected to the message if you follow along. But the first thing is expectations in life can set us up for a big letdown, can't they? Expectation in life can set you up for a big letdown. We expect one thing, but we get something different, something that we didn't hope for. We was hoping for this, but then we didn't achieve that, and it kind of lets us down, right? And it can happen in our relationship with Jesus. It's true. And the reason is because sometimes we have these big expectations of Jesus. We expect when we come to know Lord and God's on our side, right? God's on my side, then life is always going to be great. And when it happens in our life that something doesn't go great, then we're like, whoa, wait a minute, God, where are you? You were supposed to be here. This moment right now, I was expecting you. We think sometimes that nothing is going to bad happen in our lives, and we're going to be blessed. And if God doesn't deliver when we're in those moments, then we think something must be wrong. God, am I off kilter with you? God, did I do something to you? That's why this is happening in my life, right? Because of our expectations of what God should be doing in our lives, and if they aren't met, then suddenly God becomes different to us, or that our life is wrong, or we're doing something wrong, and it can kind of derail us a little bit. When it comes to being a disciple of Jesus, we probably should have the right expectations of knowing what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, right? Because if we expect it to just be sunshine and rainbows all the time, and it isn't, then and it's going to be a problem. And we get into something that we didn't bargain for. We're like, Jesus, I thought you were going to do this in my life. And so then we can get discouraged, and we can feel tested. We can break down in our lives, and our relationship sometimes can even fail, and it can cause us to get shipwrecked. The Apostle Paul, who was writing to his understudy Timothy, and we studied the second book of Timothy, in the first book, though he writes him in his first letter, he's kind of warning Timothy about this. He says, hold on to faith and a good conscience, which some have rejected and thereby shipwrecked their faith. He's like, you got to be careful. If you're not holding on to your faith, if you're not there in that moment, it can actually shipwreck your faith. And I don't think any one of us sits here today coming to church going, well, I'm going to plan to wreck my faith with God. I'm going to just shipwreck that whole thing, right? It's not that we're thinking we're going to do that. It's not like we plan on doing that, but sometimes it can happen when expectations that we thought were going to happen or hope for don't happen, and we feel let down. And that's what happens sometimes, and we become discouraged. And so how can you and I avoid that? Because difficult things come into our lives all the time. In fact, if I were to sit down and interview every one of us, we probably could name a few different things that are happening in your life, and you're like, yeah, things are happening. And if we were to say, okay, well, maybe that's kind of the norm, then maybe those things shouldn't discourage us as much as we let them discourage us. And so we're in the series, The Good Life, Learning to Live Like Jesus. And basically, we're looking at the life of Jesus through the lens of the Gospel of Mark. So as we're reading the Gospel of Mark, because there's 4 different Gospels, 4 accounts of Jesus' life, we're looking at it through what Mark was looking through. And if we expect that our life, if we're discovering Jesus didn't just come to die for us, but he also came to live for us. So he could live as an example so that we could be like him. So we could live like him. He showed us how to live. And the life of Jesus, and if you really study it, and we're looking at it right now, is an indicator of what we should expect for our lives to be. Because if we're looking at Jesus and he's our leader, right, and he's going through good things, and he's going through adversity, and he's going through different things, then we can expect a similar thing for our life. And so as we watch him, we can learn that adversity doesn't have to affect our lives. We can learn that it doesn't have to break down us spiritually and separate us from God. And so we're picking it up in chapter 6 right now. And so he's been doing these incredible miracles. Last week, the whole chapter was just covered with these supernatural miracles that Jesus performed that the disciples and everybody didn't even expect that he could do because he had the power of God. And if you want, you can listen to last week's message. You can go to our website at myfaithgeneration.com or go to Faith Generation on our YouTube channel and see it there. But he's working these incredible miracles. He's changing lives both inside and out. People are not just being changed outwardly, but inside they're changing. They're coming close to God. His reputation is growing. As we read last week, sometimes the crowds are so big, they're so great, that he can't barely even move. That's how much the people are following him around. Every time he'd show up someplace in a city, they would just flock to him immediately. And at this point in the story, Jesus decides to go back to his hometown of Nazareth. And he's going to go there, and we would expect to see this huge welcome. Like, I heard Jesus, we heard about you, things that are happening all over the country, all around the Sea of Galilee. We've heard these things. You would expect that maybe there would even be like a giant parade, just like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers got like a week ago or so, right? Because they won the Super Bowl, and like, here's Jesus, yay! But that's not exactly what happened. Let's pick it up here in chapter 6. It says, Then Jesus went out from there and came to his own country, and his disciples followed him. And when the Sabbath had come, he began to teach in the synagogue, and many hearing him were astonished, saying, Where did this man get these things? And what wisdom is this which he has given to him? And such mighty works are performed by his hands. Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us? So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, A prophet is not without honor except in his own country, among his own relatives and his own house. Now he could do no mighty work there except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief. And he went about the villages in a circuit teaching. So it wasn't the warm welcome that his disciples and Jesus expected when he got back there. In fact, they're like, I'm sorry, excuse me, but how is it that you're able to do these miracles? It doesn't even seem that they're as excited about the miracles as they're like, how are you able to do this? I'm like, is this some kind of trick? Like, where'd you get this wisdom? Is there a book out there that you read that I'm not sure? You just read the latest one, I didn't hear about it. Like, where's this coming from? Because here's the deal. I know you. Aren't you the guy, you lived the second house on the right down the block, and you were like the handyman that used to come around and fix everybody's stuff? Isn't that you? I think you fixed my doors 2 years ago. Like that door that was off the hinge, wasn't that you? And isn't that your brother that I hang out with and your sisters? I see them. Aren't you like the son of Mary? Like, isn't this you just the ordinary guy, right? That's what they thought. He was an ordinary guy. And because they believed they knew him, they didn't believe in him. Isn't that weird? Like, somehow I know you, so you can't be the Son of God. There's no way. I mean, just imagine anyway if like your friend walked up to you and said, hey, I'm the Son of God. You're like, I know a lot more about you than you think. There's no way you're the Son of God. And so nor did they listen to what he said. We're not going to believe in you, and we're not going to listen to what you say. And therefore, he couldn't work any miracles in that city. Why couldn't he work any miracles in that city? Or it says he only laid a hand on a few of them and healed a few sick. It was because they didn't believe in him, they didn't even bother to go to him for the miracles. Let's not bring my friend because this guy is just Jesus, the carpenter, right? So here's something you can expect if you're a disciple of Jesus. And so we're going to talk about 3 things that we can expect when you're a disciple. You can expect opposition to make you better. You can expect opposition because it's going to make you better. See, Jesus gave all those who wish to follow him a warning. He said to this, as his disciples, he's kind of praying for them as he's going to go away. He says this, do you remember what I told you? He's talking to them. A slave is not greater than the master. Since they persecuted me, naturally, they're going to persecute you. And if they had listened to me, they would listen to you. Jesus said, look at my life. Take a look at my life. If I'm your teacher, I'm your master, and I'm the Son of God, if they do all this, right, they persecute you, they don't listen to me, they don't do that, they're not going to listen to you. If they hated me and rejected me, they're going to do the same to you. And so we have to understand that there's going to be opposition in our life just by the nature of being a disciple of Jesus Christ. We hear about a lot of the blessings that come from following God, and it's true. Your life with Jesus is far better off than your life without Jesus. That's the truth, and we'll preach that all day long. And today's message, though, is not meant to discourage you and I as we go through this, but it's actually meant to prepare us. Because no matter what you do, and you say, well, I don't want to believe what you're trying to say to me right now, it's still going to happen. Because Jesus himself said it's going to happen. And just because you follow Jesus, it's not going to make your life, like as I said earlier, all sunshine and rainbows. That's not going to be the case. If we are prepared, we will be better equipped to handle the adversity that life throws your and my way. So that when we experience our expectations not being met, we're not going to be discouraged in the God who loves us. So his own towns rejected him. And if that weren't enough, when this happens, he kind of leaves the city. And as he leaves, he gets this news about John the Baptist. And so listen to what it says here. For Herod, he was the king of the area at that time, ruling in that area. He says himself had sent and laid hold of John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, for he had married her. So Herod sees his brother's wife, and he likes her, and I guess she likes him. It's so funny that their name is Herod and Herodias. But anyway, I just find that weird. And she likes him back. You got my name? I have your name? Oh, and they think they're a match. And so they get together and they get married, but it's his brother's wife. And because John had said to Herod, it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife, therefore Herodias held it against him and wanted to kill him. She's really mad at John. I don't like what you're saying. This isn't cool. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a just and holy man, and he protected him. And when he heard him, he did many things and heard him gladly. So Herod takes John, puts him in prison. So now John's kind of off the scene. He's not baptizing anymore. And he's in prison. This is how John kind of spends the rest of his life. And Herod loved to listen to him because he probably heard those things that he was saying and it made him feel good. So he kind of liked it. And he just kind of kept him alive, even though Herodias wants him dead. She wants him dead. And so Herodias' moment finally comes one day when King Herod is celebrating his birthday. And so he's got all the officials and the nobles and the military commanders together, and he's having this great party, and the room's probably bigger than this, probably all these rooms together, and he's out there having a great time. And then at one point, as they're probably all drinking and getting, sloshed and having fun, this daughter of Herodias, her name is Salome, that's where we're told from extra-biblical writings, but she comes before him and she dances. And she dances before the crowd. And I just want you to know, this dance is not your ordinary dance. I mean, this dance probably involved a pole and some $1 bills, okay? Get the idea? All right, so just so you get it, because you're like, wow, why did she really impress them? So she's dancing out there, and they're like really excited. And at the end of it, he's like, so grateful for this dance. And he's like, you know what? Whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. And she's like, oh, really? Now he says this in front of everybody. So like he's kind of on the line to deliver. And so she goes back to Herodias, her mom, and she's like, Mom, he said half the kingdom. She probably set it up, the whole thing. And so she goes back, tell him I want John the Baptist's head on a platter. So she goes back, can you give me the head on a platter of John the Baptist? And she goes, and of course Herod, now feeling embarrassed, not knowing what to do, even though he didn't want to kill him, he kills him, gives her the head, and gives it back to Herodias. And it's gross, right? Who wants to see that? But this is what happens. And this is the news that Jesus gets. See, there are times when the world will not understand you and me, okay? Because we're Christians. People will think Christianity is just a crutch sometimes. You probably heard that. You get the reaction, oh yeah, you go to church, it's good for you. Yeah, you do it. I got my own thing. Though maybe they're going to think you're crazy. I can't believe. You believe what? You believe a guy rose from the dead? You believe in miracles? What about evolution? What about other things in life? Where does this all come to play? But the opposition, when it comes into our lives, should only make us stronger. You see, that's the purpose of opposition sometimes in our lives. It's going to make us better. God will use opposition in your and my life to make us stronger. At the Boston Museum of Science, there's many museums of science that are really awesome. I really love that one. I actually have a friend who works there. But when you go to the Museum of Science, they have many exhibits. But one of them is this cross-sectional cut of a sequoia tree. And then this thing is like 10 feet wide. Here's like a picture of a sequoia tree cut. And if you'll notice all those little tiny markings, those are dates. Because this tree right here is like 2,000 years old. So they have marked, okay, this is when, I can't even think, but this is when the Crusades happened, this is when the Dark Ages were, this is when Napoleon was fighting, and they have all this stuff, and you can see it. And if you're there and you have a guide, the guide will actually come up to the tree, and he'll look at that, and then he'll start to point to these black rings, because each year is a ring. Each season marks that tree, and that's why you see all these rings on a tree when you cut them open. And as you see those rings, they're marked there, but there's all these, every so often they'll come across a black ring. And the guys say, well, you see these black rings? The black rings is when it survived a forest fire. Yeah, it's incredible. And so they can kind of tell a little bit by cutting that open. So the idea, though, is that this tree, because its roots were so deep, because it had gone through so much adversity, it was able to survive the most incredible circumstances and live 2,000 years. Who knows what that tree has seen? But it was the adversity in the tree's life that allowed it to make it stronger and to grow better. And that's what the Apostle James is telling us. The brother of Jesus later comes to believe in his own brother, and he writes a whole letter to the churches. He says this, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." You see, sometimes things come into our lives, and God allows those things in our lives because He wants to make us stronger. He wants us to be able to stand on our own 2 feet. My kids didn't know how to stand on their own 2 feet. They had to lean on me. But you know what? Once in a while, you got to let them go. And they're going to fall, and they're going to hurt themselves so that they can learn, man, I got to work harder at trying to walk on my own. And God is teaching us at times to walk on our own in different areas of our lives. God will use the opposition that you face in life to make you better and to strengthen you. So there are 2 other scenes where Jesus kind of puts the disciples in situations that they're not equipped for. That's what's coming next. And so I want to show you this first one. He says this, "And He called the 12 to Himself." So Jesus, He's rejected from Nazareth, and He calls these 12 disciples to Himself, and He began to send them out 2 by 2, and He gave them power over unclean spirits. He commanded them to take nothing for the journey except a staff, no bag, no bread, no copper in their money belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics. And He said to them, "In whatever place you enter a house, stay there till you depart from that place. And whoever will not receive you nor hear you, when you depart from there, shake off the dust under your feet as a testimony against them. Assuredly, I say to you, it will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for that city." So they went out and preached that people should repent. And they cast away out many demons and anointed with oil many who were sick and healed them. I don't know about you, but I used to read this when I was younger, and this was like an intimidating verse to me. Because I'm like, God, are you going to actually ask me to go to some city with like just bare minimum clothes, don't even take an extra set of clothes with you, don't take any money, and go and evangelize people? And like power is going to happen? I don't know about you, but I used to apply this to my life and go, look, this is crazy. I don't know how this is going to happen. He said, just head out there and go do miracles. Don't take anything with you. Everything's going to be taken care of. I mean, that's a huge step of faith. And I'm like, that's what I thought God was saying in that verse, but he's not really saying that. He did this one time with the disciples. He does it again with 70 others, but he didn't ask them that. In fact, later on, he says, hey, no more, don't go out like that. Don't go out with just no money and everything. From now on, do that and even take a sword with you. So this was something that he was using as an example for the disciples and for you and me to learn from, and that is this. Expect to be in over your head to grow your faith. Expect to be in over your head to grow your faith. You're going to be in situations that are over your head, that you can't handle. That's what God says. And I've often heard it said that Jesus says, Jesus will never give you more than you can handle. Now, has anyone ever heard that before? A few of you? Yeah, you hear it around in Christian circles, and they say, hey, Jesus will never give you more. God never gives you more than you can handle. And I guess we get that sometimes because we want to encourage people in the difficulty that they're going through. Like, come on, you can do it. You can stand through this. He's not going to give you more than you can handle. And so we kind of encourage them in that way, and we probably get it from a verse that goes like this. It was in 1 Corinthians, Paul's writing. He says this, the temptations in your life are no different from what others experience. And God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. And when you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you can endure. But he's talking about temptations here. And he's saying, listen, you don't have to fall to sin. There's temptations that are coming to your life, but I have given you enough strength that will never be more than you can handle so that you can take the other path, the correct path. But he's talking about temptation, not trial in our lives. You see, the truth is God gives us things we can't handle all the time. Life throws at us things in life that we can't handle all the time, right? There are things that are common to every person that are beyond your and my ability to cope. The death of someone important in your life, dude, that's beyond us. And that happens to everybody, whether regardless you're a Christian or not a Christian. Or you get a physical sickness. You know, I think I'm in good shape and I'm a strong person. Dude, you ever get knocked out with a big flu and you're hurting so much and you're like, I'll never survive this. And imagine that's just from a cold. Some people get real diagnosis of things that limit what they can do. And it's like, this is a little bit beyond us. Or maybe it's that new job you thought was going to be easy, and then you're like, oh my goodness, I'm not sure how I'm going to make it another day, how I'm going to survive. I don't have enough hours in the week to perform what they're asking me to do. Or try parenting. You start parenting, you're in over your head. Or marriage, living two vulnerable, fallen creatures trying to live together and make it happy, right? Like this is like, okay, that's a recipe for just difficulty. There are things that we never experience in life that sometimes are over our heads. See, God gives us things that we're not prepared for, that we can't handle on our own. And he uses those situations to transform us. Now, why would Jesus do that? Why would God allow things in over our head to happen in our lives, things that we're not capable of? Because he wants us to need him. God's using those in our life and your and my life to draw us closer to him. You see, Jesus challenged them to go out alone. Go without me. All this time they've been following Jesus. Jesus performs the miracle. They're just standing on the side like, that is amazing. You are great. Wow. And then he's like, okay, go do it yourself. Okay, wait, I just thought I was watching. You're sending me out there? Yeah, go do it. Trust me, go do it. And what happens? The testimony was, man, we healed people. We did all these amazing things. And so they returned from the preaching trip, and they're like, Jesus, you wouldn't believe it. Demons were cast out. People were healed. Some of them were praising God. You couldn't believe what was happening. And Jesus is like, I know. This is what I want you to do. Get in over your head. Because then when you need me, I will show up in your life. You see, I don't know what it's like to experience these miracles firsthand. I mean, I'd have been thrilled. Cast out a demon and it goes. Heal somebody, they can't even walk, and suddenly they're walking right in front of them. My goodness, how exciting is that? It's a scary thing to go, okay, I'm going to be there and I'm going to trust you. But it's also incredible when God shows up, isn't it? But you can't have one without the other. So they come back, they're all excited, and they've been gone for who knows how long. We're not even told, but Jesus is like, okay, you guys are tired. So let's all go together. We're just going to go on a little sabbatical. We're going to disappear and get a break. And so they go together. They go to a deserted place. But this crowd kind of sees them. And they're like, oh, there they are. Hey. And they all show up. And Jesus sees this massive crowd of people. I mean, literally, it's about 20,000 people show up. And he's like, all right, okay. And he sees they were without a shepherd. They're looking for guidance. And he's like, look at all. Okay, so I'm going to preach. And he starts preaching. And he just keeps preaching throughout the whole day and night. And they're skipping meals. And they're just hanging out there. And suddenly, the disciples are all looking around. They're like, dude, I missed breakfast. So that was okay. But now lunch. And now it's almost evening. Jesus, we got a problem here. And so they bring their problem to Jesus, and this is what happens. Go ahead, put it up. When the day was now far spent, his disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and already the hour is late. Send them away that they may go into the surrounding country and villages and buy themselves bread, for they have nothing to eat. We've been here all day, Jesus. We're hungry. There's no 7-Eleven down this block here. We can't just go buy a Slurpee. So he says, but he answered and said to them, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii of bread and give them something to eat? I love the response of Jesus. They come to him with this big problem. Look, there's like, listen, there's probably, it says there were 5,000 men that were gathered there. That's just the men. So if they each had a woman with them, that's 10,000. If they had one kid, that's 15. There's somewhere between 15,000, 20,000 people that are there. And the disciples are like, there's a problem here. I can't even feed myself, and we're going to try to feed them? And Jesus is like, what are we going to do, Jesus? Send them away. They're expecting a natural answer. They come up with a natural solution. Here's the problem. We're all hungry. Here's the solution. Send them away. And Jesus is like, I got a different idea. You feed them. I mean, can you imagine being over your head? Talk about being over your head, right? It's like, oh my goodness, how are we going to do this? They're faced with this impossible task. And I don't know, the bean counter in the group immediately calculated the improbability, right? I'm like the bean counter. That's what happens when I hear someone wants to do something grand. I wish I was more the visionary person. I'm trying to be. But it's like when I hear the visionary say, we're going to go do this, and I'm always the one who goes, well, here's the reason why we can't, right? I'm counting all the beans. Like, this is a no. There's no way we can do this. Do you realize what you're asking? Do you realize how much that's going to cost? How many man hours? This is impossible. And this is what they're all thinking. It was probably Levi because he was the tax collector, right? And he had his abacus, and he's like making the whole thing. It's going to cost us about 200 denarii. And like a denarii was like one day's wage. So imagine whatever it is you make. He's like, take 2/3 of your income, over half your income, and that's what it's going to take to feed them. Imagine that dinner bill, right? It's kind of the check comes. Oh, whoa, I didn't know it was that much, right? And they're like, Jesus. Levi over here, Matthew says that it's going to cost 200 denarii, and Jesus is like, okay, all right, well, we don't have enough. Jesus throws it back at them and says, well, what do you have? Right? Jesus isn't giving up. I love it. First off, like, send them away. Nope, you feed them. Whoa, we don't have that kind of money. What do you have? Come on, Jesus. Like, what do you want from me? Right? This is where these guys are looking at him, and he's like, all right, this little kid right here, he brought, his little Happy Meal with him, and it's got 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. We got 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, Jesus. And I think they probably said it like that, like, now what are you going to do? It's like, you're throwing it on us. What are you going to do about it? But this is like the beauty of Jesus. They're looking at him like he's crazy. And they're looking at the crowds, and they're thinking, this is all we got. It's impossible. And this is the interesting thing. When we say it's impossible, Jesus looks back and says, it's enough. Like, I don't know what you're going through in your life at the moment, right? And we're like, Jesus, this is impossible. And Jesus is like, don't worry. It's enough. It's enough. He wasn't fazed for one instance. That's the beauty of Jesus. It's like a paradox. He asks us to go in over our head. It's impossible for us. Literally, it's impossible under our physical circumstances and our abilities to do something. And Jesus looks at you and says, it's enough. Whatever you got, I'm going to make it work in this situation. And these guys are like, this is crazy. One of the hardest verses in the Bible, I think, to grasp for you and me. And I look at it, and every time I read it, I just think, I don't know how to do this. Because it's one of these crazy verses where Jesus goes, it's back on you, back in over your head. Let's see if you can do it. This is what the verse says here. We're going to put it on the screen right now. Jesus said to them, and this happens after they come off this mountain. He's with just a few of the disciples. They come down. His other disciples can't heal a child that's demon-possessed. He ends up casting it out. Then they come to him afterwards and say, how come we couldn't do it? And Jesus said to them, because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, listen to this is the killer. If you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from there, here to there, and it will be moved, and nothing will be impossible for you. I don't know about you, but has anyone felt like this has happened in your life? I'm like, I think I have at least a mustard seed. I think I have at least a seed, right? I got something, but why can't I move the mountain? Maybe that verse isn't meant for the beginner. You ever go to the gym? They have these new gyms. They have, these CrossFit gyms, right? And they got these hardcore workouts. And I have never done CrossFit. It sounds fascinating to me, but we used to have guys on our staff who would do CrossFit. And they would come back and they would be talking about the WOD, which is the workout for the day or something like that it stands for. I don't even remember. And so they do their workout. Yeah, workout of the day. There you go, WOD. So they're like, dude, this, you wouldn't believe the WOD today. It was like 100 sit-ups. It was like 6,000 push-ups and pull-ups and run around for an hour and all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And you can't just join and do the hardest, toughest WOD. If you did that, you would die. Or you would be so sore, it would take you weeks to recover. Maybe you start with the lowest one, and then you begin to work your way up. And maybe that verse for you and me is God says, look, I'm going to put you in over your head in a situation so that I can grow your faith. So that you can begin to have faith like that, like the mustard seed. And so for you and I, these things come into our life, and we can put our trust in the middle of that difficulty in God. No matter what happens, God, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to believe in you. Instead of looking at us and our circumstances, God says, I'm going to continue to grow you, just like when you go work out at the gym. It doesn't start off that way, but as you go, you can do more and more and more. And so God's going to continually throw us into situations that are over our heads so that we can grow our faith and that we can need Him and we're better able to handle life. Look, there's one more scene I want to get to, and so I can close. But immediately, He made His disciples, so they feed the disciples. By the way, they feed everybody with the food. He multiplies it so that they all are fed. And right after that, He immediately gets His disciples into a boat. He made His disciples get into a boat and go before Him to the other side, to Bethesda, while He sent the multitude away. So He goes, guys, get in the boat, and He stays there. He sends the multitude away that they had just fed. And when He had sent them away, He departed to the mountain to pray. And now when the evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and He was alone on the land. And then He saw them straining and rowing, for the wind was against them. Now about the fourth watch of the night, He came to them walking on the sea, and would have passed them by. And when they saw Him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost. And they cried out, for they all saw Him and were troubled. But immediately He talked with them and said to them, be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. And then He went up into the boat to them, and the wind ceased, and they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure, and marveled, for they had not understood about the loaves, because their heart was hardened. So we come to the end of this chapter, and His disciples are once again on the Sea of Galilee. I mean, they've been going back and forth on the boats, and the winds are crashing down on them. Jesus sees them. I don't know if He's on the mountain or He's using His X-ray God vision, and He sees them out there, and they're out there all night long making no progress. It's hard work. And this is the final point that I would like you to know, is that expect difficulties in order to do great things. Expect difficulties in order to do great things. Then, after Jesus dismissed the crowd, He goes up and He prays, and those guys are out there, and they're rowing all night long, and they haven't gotten anywhere. Have you ever tried to row or go against the wind in your life? Ever? Yeah, I mean, it is hard work. My wife and I, we went sailing with a friend and his wife in Miami Bay one time. He rented the boat, and he took us out there. And when you're sailing, you just kind of let out the sea. That's actually a picture of that day. That's my awesome back that you can see right there, and my hat, and That's the boat we were on, and we're sailing in the bay, and you could kind of, because the wind was with us behind our backs and pushing the boat forward, you just kind of let out the sail, and we just kind of got to the destination that we wanted to get to in probably like 15 or 20 minutes. And then we're out there, we anchored a little bit, we had lunch on the boat, we went swimming, and then we got back in the boat. And we're starting to come back. Now the wind is in our faces, and we start going slowly one side, and then to the other side. My wife is like, what are you guys doing? Why don't we just go right back? And I'm like, honey, this is sailing. Don't you know what sailing is? When the wind is blowing you, you can't go straight into it. You have to tack. Here's a thing what you have to do. When the wind is blowing right at you, you have to what's called tacking. You go diagonally one way with the sail, just catching some of the wind, and you have to reverse the boat and go back and forth till you get to your destination. It was like an hour later, and she was like expecting to get there like in the 15 minutes. And she's like, I don't understand why is it taking so long. I'm like, that's what sailing is. That's the fun of sailing, back and forth, getting to where you want to get to, you know? And she was like, I don't get it. So imagine these guys in the middle of the storm, like this wind and waves. It wasn't so bad that they were fearing for their lives. They just were getting nowhere. And Jesus up there, it's the fourth watch. The fourth watch was in the night, was the time between 6 and 9 in the morning. So it's like the dim light. You ever go outside and the sun's barely rising and you see kind of shadows, right? You can't tell if it's a tree. You can't tell everything clearly. It's kind of like a little tiny bit of light. And I'm sure it was a little bit cloudy too. And Jesus starts walking out to them. It's just incredible. Jesus is like insane. Jesus would have been blowing my mind every single day. I mean, if you can imagine living with him. And here he is, he's walking out there, but they see this figure and they're like, it's a phantom, it's a ghost. And I'm thinking, man, why do these guys think it's a ghost? I believe because they're thinking, this is a mess. I've been working really hard, getting nowhere. We're trying to do what Jesus told us to do, but it's not working. God, I must have done it wrong. God, you're not in this. And so they can't recognize Jesus in their moment. Do you get it? The reason they don't see Jesus is like, Jesus, this isn't what we were called to do. Of course you didn't call us to do this. We're out of God's will somehow, so you couldn't be here in the midst of it. So they're like, you can't be him. And then he shows up. And they go, oh, it is you. You mean we were supposed to be in this storm? I love what it said in the first sentence of this. It says, Jesus made them get into the boat. The Greek word for made there is anakazo. It means that he forced them to. He insisted on it. Imagine them before it started. They're on the shore. He goes, everybody in the boat. He was probably pushing them, launching the boat. Think about that, right? Jesus, boom. Jesus, you sent us out into this? You made us get into this situation where I'm struggling so hard, where I'm working so hard. It was from you? Because they're in the middle of it and they're going like, it's so hard, it can't be from God. This can't be. And that happens to you and me all the time. There are times in my life where things are difficult and we're like, well, maybe this isn't from God. Why? Would God really want me to work this hard? Does God really want this in my life? And God's like, yes, I pushed you into this. And you're exactly where I want you to be. But sometimes we think if it's difficult, it can't be from him. But that's not what's happening. You see, God asks us to do things that we're not capable of. I love the last sentence there. They didn't understand the lesson of the loaves. I'm like, how do you equate being on the boat with the loaves, Jesus? He's saying, because I'm asking you to do things that are impossible for you, but then I'm going to show up and do something amazing in your life. They were impossible to do on their own. God is going to ask you to do things in your life that you're incapable of. The next time Jesus says to you, that person needs you to talk to them, you feel it, you know it, tell them about Jesus. It's impossible. It's impossible for you and me to convince somebody to know the Lord or to know Jesus. But he goes, if you'll open your mouth and go do the impossible, even though you think it's impossible, I'm going to show up. And in our lives, God's asking us to do things that are difficult, that are hard. There are trials that are going to come into our lives. We saw it happen to Jesus. Why? So that he can show his glory in the midst of that situation. You see, if God only asked you to do the things that you could do, then you would never really experience God. Think about this for a moment. Because if you can do it, you don't need him. And if we went through our lives every single day and is everything that we can handle and do it all by ourselves, then we never have need for him, nor would we ever see his glory work in our lives. But for anybody here who's had the testimony of God showing up in the midst of being in over their heads, you know when it's God. There's no question it was God. And people are like, you're crazy. That's just some story. I know it's God because I was at the end of my rope. I had nothing left, and God showed up. And then we say, wow, I did see God. I experienced him. And so God's going to show up in a supernatural way in your life in the midst of that. You see, when God wants to show his power in the Bible, he always used trials. Paul is writing to this group of Hebrews, and he's writing this. He wants to encourage them and to continue in their faith. And he writes this long area. It says, it was by faith that the people of Israel went right through the Red Sea as though they were on dry ground. But when the Egyptians tried to follow, they were all drowned. It was by faith that the people of Israel marched around Jericho for 7 days and the walls came crashing down. It was by faith that Rahab, the prostitute, was not destroyed when the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. How much more do I need to say? It would take too long to recount the stories of faith of Gideon, of Barak, of Samson, of Jephthah, of David, of Samuel, and all the prophets. By faith, these people overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Their weakness was turned to strength. They became strong in battle and put the whole armies to flight. Women received their loved ones back again from death, but others were tortured, refused to turn from God in order to be set free. They placed their hope in a better life after the resurrection. They went through all of these trials. Listen, there is no miracle of David on the battlefield without Goliath. There's no parting of the Red Sea without the most powerful army that existed on the planet at that time behind the children of Israel, pressing down on them. There was no Daniel victory without the lion's den. And there was no salvation for the world without the cross. God will bring difficult things into your life because he wants to show up in a big way and do the miracles that you and I cannot do. It's the same for you and me. He's going to bring trials in our lives. But God will use them to reveal his power, to strengthen us so that we will know him in a deeper way. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I want to say thank you for your goodness, Lord. Sometimes it's hard to believe, Lord, that we're in a difficult situation and you're somehow in it. Because we believe that life should be getting better and better and that those things should diminish in our lives. Maybe it's not that they're going to diminish. Maybe it's going to be that we're going to grow and be strengthened and we're going to deal with them differently so that they don't impact us the way they did. Lord, I know today you want to show up in someone's life. Someone right now who's been praying for your strength and your help. Lord, give them the strength to keep on praying and keep on trusting, Lord, because I know you're going to show up. Help them to believe that too. God, if there's one thing that we learn throughout the Bible is that you always show up. It may not be according to our time. It may not be according to our expectation, but God, you show up and you deliver. Lord, for the people praying today, show up in their lives in a big way. Let's just remain in the attitude of prayer for a moment, but if you've never trusted in God and Jesus as your Lord and Savior, he wants to show up in a big way in your life. But the way that happens is we do have to take a step of faith, believing what God said about his Son, that he died on a cross to forgive our sins so that we could be with him forever. And that begins that journey. When we trust in him, when we ask Jesus into our life, it begins this journey of faith, this walk and relationship with God that we have personally. And the way to do that is simply pray and ask him into your heart. We usually just say a prayer, so I'm going to lead you in a prayer right now. And if I'm going to just ask everybody to repeat it out loud. Lord God, I open my heart and I invite you inside to be my God, my Savior, and my friend. Forgive me of my sins. Wash me clean. I've decided today to follow you, Jesus. From this day forever, I'm yours. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.